Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. If blacks were to be slaves again, 90% would say it's God's will. I think there is a lot of truth in that. Indeed, I would venture to go as far as to say those of us in Black Africa are still slaves. We have moved from the slavery of the slave trade as we know it to the slavery of being a colonized people. And with the removal of the apartheid regime in South Africa, it marked the last African country to free itself from white colonial oppression. But as each of the many African countries gained our independence, we only soon discovered that we have removed the Western colonial power master only to replace him with a new colonial master. In the case of Zimbabwe, Chinese. The level of corruption in Zimbabwe, and most of it, it must be said, at the instigation of the Chinese, who helped Zimbabwe fight to end British rule, only to instill themselves as the new masters. There's no doubt that the Chinese have taken advantage of Zanu PF. They are no more, they are the new puppet master. And the Zanu PF are ruling elite as much as they would want to pretend or believe that they are in charge. The truth of the matter is they are not. And so we have found ourselves in a situation where we have got new masters. I would argue that slavery comes in all forms. You can have slaves in chains, but you can also have slaves who are not in chains, who will be physically working day and night for the benefit of their master. Their interests are secondary, secondary to that of the master. That is the relationship between the master and the slave. But being a slave can also mean mentally. I think mentally, most of Black Africa has never been really free. They have never, one of the characteristics of being a mental slave is that you're not able to think for yourself. That is a serious problem. It's interesting how the master, under those situations, will manipulate you, con you into believing that you're doing something out of your own interests, when in reality, you're now serving their interests above your own. The Chinese helped Zimbabweans fight to end British rule, as they did with many other African countries Russia did the same thing. And the people were made to believe they were actually serving their own interests, when in reality, they were not. During the GNU, Mugabe conned Morgan Tsvangirai and his MDC friends, with bribes, of course, into forgetting about implementing the democratic reforms, although that was the number one task the people of Zimbabwe had set the MDC leaders to do. He conned them into believing that they didn't have to worry about implementing reforms. And so, for the 5 critical years of the GNU, not even one token reform was implemented. It served Zanu PF very well. Zanu PF retained its power to rig elections, blatantly rig elections, carte blanche powers, while Changira and company were made to believe that they were serving the people's interests, or at least their own interests, by selling out. Morgan Changira and company have since done the same thing to the people. They have conned the people into believing that they were going to implement the reforms. And then when they realized they were not going to implement those reforms, they decided to tell the lie that they could win elections without implementing reforms. And unfortunately, the people, unable to think for themselves, have fallen for it. During the GNU, MDC leaders failed to implement even one reform. And Zanu PF, MDC, have exploited that not ignorance. And they've changed the tune to pretend that they could deliver democratic change in Zimbabwe without implementing reforms. And the people who are unable to think for themselves have swallowed that lie in turn. There's no doubt, there's no denying that MDC leaders have been participating in these flawed elections out of greed. Indeed, I've often shown the quotation from David Coulthard admitting that very point. That MDC leaders knew the election process was so flawed, so illegal, that the logical step would have been not to participate. But they've persisted in participating out of greed. The people, unable to think for themselves, have swallowed that lie again and again and again. Last year, the people believed Chamisa's lie that he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes, when of course he had not done so. And the people themselves, by participating in those flawed elections, made it very difficult for SADC to do anything to discipline Zanu PF. That is the problem. That is at the heart of our problem. The issue of mental slavery is an important one. And I think it is a way of actually addressing this problem of our failure to have a healthy and functioning democratic system of government. Benjamin, welcome to the program. What do you think of this issue of if blacks were slaves again, 90% would say it's God's will?
Good day to everybody. Uh, it's if you look at our race, you know, from from back in the day to the present day, we really haven't, we haven't put ourselves out there. I mean, let's look at Africa. You know, Africa should have been or should be the driving force for all these other continents, given the vast wealth, minerals, it has. Yet we are the ones that go begging for bread. You know, we we complained. You know, we complain. We always. I don't know how to put it. We were under slavery. Yes, we managed to get ourselves out of that. Then after that, we did not proceed. You know, we just stood. We got ourselves, the ability you know, to rule ourselves, but then we gave it away. And now, we are just stuck in the same hole, and we seem to be digging ourselves deeper and deeper and deeper. Yes, there are countries in Africa that are doing okay, but they should have been way up there by now. you know our people have failed to rule themselves. Our people have failed to think for themselves. And I would agree to say, mental slavery is what is is happening now, especially when it comes to Africa, when it comes to Zimbabwe, mental slavery. We have given we're given away our will to say yes or no. Our ability to reason as human beings, what separates us from animals, we have given it away. We blindly follow. We're like wildebeest. If one goes and plunge over a gorge, the whole head is going to follow without thinking, just because the leader has taken the first leap. So it's rather sad. It's really sad that we always claim to say we fought wars, we liberated ourselves, only to go and put ourselves in a much bigger ditch. They say from the frying pan into the fire. So this is where we find ourselves right now.
Could agree with you more. I think if you look at the map of Africa there, other than for countries like Botswana and South Africa, most African countries have got dysfunctional systems of government. We do not have to reinvent the wheel. We only have to apply it to work for ourselves. And yet, we have failed to do so. Every leader that has come into power think they and they alone know what is best. And I think we, the citizens, have also fallen into the trap by following those leaders so blindly to the point where we treat them as if they are demigods. I'll say it on this platform, and I'll say it again. This Chamisa Chete Chete mentality, it's a personality cult. It stops you thinking for yourself because you believe Chamisa cannot do nothing wrong. It's shocking that even now, many people would not want to admit, if you ask them a point blank question, did Chamisa lie last year when he said it plugged the voting in loopholes? You can see how much they will struggle to deny it. They don't want to admit that it happened. When in reality it is. It happened. And it is a starting point. They don't want to admit that Chamisa is a mere mortal who lied, who is corrupt, who is incompetent, who have failed to implement any meaningful democratic reforms the last 24 years. Because that is the necessary starting point for them to then say, okay, let's find somebody who is going to implement these reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. That kind of mental boxing yourself into a position where you've got to accept Chamisa is a demigod is unbelievable. How anyone in this day and age would believe a mere mortal, particularly one with a track record of failures like Chamisa, is a demigod, beggars belief.
Yeah. I mean, this mentality is not only within the Chamisa followers. You're finding it within Zanu PF as well. Where you find recently, just today, I was seeing a video of somebody that had people around him, and he was saying how the way he was talking about this whole SADC chairmanship, as if nobody could have picked up the position, and everybody nominated to say ED is the one that is supposed to do it. Yet this thing is a rotational thing. This is how shallow the leaders are. With him standing up there, he is in a position of leadership, and he is talking nonsense, and people are clapping to that nonsense. See, this is where the problem is. And you are right. When Chamisa claimed that he had strategies in place, and the first thing, if you would think, you would say, hold on a minute. Your first strategy, if you're saying that you've got it covered, where is a verified voter's role in this whole thing that you're dragging us into? There was nothing. But people clapped. People, were happy to hear that, this time it was going to be, the time where they will get rid of Zanu PF. That was naive to think, in such a thing, in such terms, when clearly the delimitation report was a mess. The list is long. The list is very long. There were no polling agents at all the polling stations. So what was covered that people were happy to hear when he was saying it. See, this is where we suffer our biggest problem. Both Zanu PF supporters and CCC supporters. This is where they suffer. They do not ask questions. You are not even allowed to ask questions. So what is your point being there if you cannot get, accountability, verification? We see in the Western world, presidents are made answerable, to the people. In Africa, it's a one-way traffic. What he says goes. And we don't question. We just simply just go along. And unfortunately, that is why you find we are in this mess in the first place.
Thank you, Benjamin. I'll just conclude this playing a video of somebody explaining why Africa is poor.
Africa's politics have fallen into the hands of elites, as these people just do what the colonialists did, which was suck the wealth out and shift it overseas. World Bank says between 60 and 70% of Africa's capital shifted out of the continent. It's in banks in Europe. So there's this mentality which I think has allowed a very small group of people to take over those countries politically, but also economically. And until that changes, that is, until there's a new generation or even a revolution that actually takes power back to African people, I think those problems, that lack of development, will continue.
Couldn't agree with him more. I think I'll put it slightly differently. Until the ordinary Zimbabweans, ordinary Black Africans, can really put on their thinking cap and start thinking for themselves, I don't think there'll be any meaningful change. As long as you're so easily conned by an upstart like Chamisa into believing outrageous lies, as long as you can easily be conned by a buffoon like Mnangagwa, it's just a bully. Mnangagwa is a bully, a dictator who is so naive and so incompetent that he doesn't realize that he's destroying the country with all this wanton looting that is taking place. But like all dictators, he believes that he has got the country's interests at heart. How anyone can believe such nonsense is unbelievable. 80% of the country's gold is being smuggled, and the buffoon thinks that is in the country's best interest. We have heard recently, although he had said he wasn't going to retire, he was going to retire rather at the end of his term. There's been talk of him coming out of retirement, or rather, his supporters chanting that he should come out of retirement and continue ruling. They want him to rule, to be ruling in 2030 in the name of this so-called Vision 2030. The truth of the matter is that vision is a mirage. Zimbabwe's economy is nosediving. There is no way you can have meaningful economic recovery when there's so much corruption, so much mismanagement. And by rigging the elections last year, he confirmed that Zimbabwe is a pariah state. Who would want to invest in a pariah state? But that's where we are. And I think people of Zimbabwe should wake up and really start thinking for themselves and realize we are going nowhere here. You don't have to wait for 2030 to realize that the country is not recovering. 2030 is 6 years away. If there was any meaningful economic recovery, we should be seeing it now. And yet, day in, day out, we see all these reports of the wanton looting that is taking place. How is the country going to become an upper middle income country when there's so much wastage of resources? It beggars belief. Ben, do you want to make your closing statement, please?
Yes. So in closing, I would like to talk about this Mnangagwa issue. I would say to the Zanu PF supporters, how soon have you forgotten how difficult it was for you to get rid of Mugabe? That now you want to go and put ED in the same position, because extending his term would mean that you have to amend the constitution. Let us not forget, the 2017, it was a coup. Whether it may be, colored red, green, black, or white, it was a coup. And Zimbabwe has that mark that it will have to carry for the rest of its life, So why would you want to go back and put such a condition that made it so difficult to get rid of the other, and then you put it again? And now it's worse. Mnangagwa has his close friends as the army. There will be no army to help. Right? So, how soon have we forgotten? This is where we are talking about our ability to think, our ability to remember. So, it's for me, I think it's a very dangerous step that we are taking, that they are taking actually, in trying to push, a fictitious agenda. Because economically, how our country stands right now, it is impossible to support an upper middle income economy. We don't have any industry to talk about. There's nothing that is running. Road networks will not be the ones that will bring that about. Our civil servants, or the people, the minimum wage, or if we have a minimum wage in Zimbabwe, is roughly people are getting $250. That's a good salary. That is nowhere near minimum upper middle income. So I don't know, is it just going to happen in 2030, or is it going to take the next 2 years that they want to extend for them to realize this? It's a question that needs answering. Some of us have got questions, and we are willing to ask, unlike some that are have sold themselves into mental slavery. So it's a very, very dangerous position that Zimbabwe is taking. One, I would say, if time is up, time is up. There is somebody that can step up. Let them go. That's what I have to say.
Well, my only closing remark on that one would be to remind people that actually Mnangagwa is illegitimate. The 2023 elections were not free, fair, and credible, and therefore they are not the democratic wishes of the people of Zimbabwe. SADC and the AU condemned those elections. And the only reason why they didn't go one step further and deny Zanu PF political legitimacy is because the people made the mistake of participating in those elections, millions. So him extending his rule beyond 2028 is ridiculous. He is illegitimate right now. But that is to be expected of a dictator. I think people of Zimbabwe we are not going to get out of this mess until we put on our thinking cap. Slavery, the worst kind of slavery is mental slavery. And most of it is self-imposed. Every one of us have got the capacity to think for themselves. But some people choose to let other people do the thinking for them. And therefore then laying themselves bare to being exploited by other people. Thank you very much for those of you who were able to listen with us, join us today, and we hope we'll be able to do it tomorrow. And thank you very much, Benjamin.
It was a pleasure.